When Mark joins his wife Lucy on an exclusive weekend at a private island hosted by her powerful client, William, he expects luxury and relaxation. Instead, he uncovers a shocking betrayal, a proposal from William to borrow Lucy for the weekend in exchange for a fortune, and her unsettling agreement to the deal. As Mark grapples with heartbreak and rage, he channels his pain into a cold, calculated plan for revenge. But as the layers of deception unfold, Mark discovers that the betrayal runs deeper than he ever imagined. In this gripping tale of love, lies, and ruthless vengeance, no one escapes unscathed. The soft hum of my car's engine filled the air as I navigated the familiar streets of our quiet suburban neighborhood. The early evening sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and I couldn't help but smile as I thought of home. Lucy and the kids would be waiting. Dinner would be warm, the conversation easy, and life, as always, would feel just right. That was the way it had always been, or so I believed. Lucy and I had been married for over a decade. From the outside, we seemed like the perfect couple, two professionals raising two bright, lively kids in a beautiful home. We had our struggles like anyone, but they never seemed insurmountable. Lucy, with her blonde hair and sparkling blue eyes, was the kind of woman who lit up every room she walked into. Her job as a client ambassador at our marketing firm suited her perfectly, she thrived on connection and charm. I, on the other hand, worked in IT, preferring the quiet hum of servers to the buzz of social interactions. Despite our differences, we fit together like two puzzle pieces, at least, that's what I thought. When I pulled into the driveway, Lucy was already standing at the door, her face bright with excitement. "Mark! You're not going to believe this," she exclaimed, her voice carrying the thrill of something new. "What is it?" I asked, stepping out of the car. She waved a sleek invitation card at me. "We've been invited to a private island for the weekend. William Fellows, one of my clients, is hosting. It's all expenses paid." I raised an eyebrow. William Fellows was a name I'd heard often over the past few months. Lucy spoke of him with a mix of admiration and awe, describing him as a confident and powerful man who commanded respect wherever he went. His name carried weight in the industry, and landing him as a client had been a coup for the firm. "Why us?" I asked cautiously. "He's inviting a few key people from the company, directors, their partners, and me, since I'm his main contact. It's a big deal, Mark. If we make a good impression, this could mean huge things for the firm." I nodded, trying to match her enthusiasm. A free weekend on a luxurious island sounded appealing, but there was something about the way she spoke of William that gnawed at the back of my mind. Still, I dismissed it as a passing thought. I trusted Lucy. I had no reason not to. 2 weeks later, we boarded a private plane bound for William's Island. The luxury was overwhelming, plush seats, champagne flowing freely, and a palpable air of exclusivity. Lucy was beside herself with excitement, her laughter ringing out as she chatted with our fellow passengers. I watched her, a small smile on my lips. She was in her element here, radiant and full of life. When we landed, the island took my breath away. Pristine white sand beaches curved around crystal-clear waters, and the main villa loomed grandly against the backdrop of swaying palms. William greeted us personally, his presence as commanding as Lucy had described. He was tall, with a neatly trimmed beard and an air of effortless confidence. His smile was charming, but his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, seemed to take in everything. "Welcome," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "I'm glad you could make it." As the weekend unfolded, I couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over me. William was a gracious host, but his attention to Lucy felt different. He sought her out during meals, laughed a little too easily at her jokes, and seemed to linger whenever they spoke. Lucy, for her part, seemed flattered by the attention. She was animated and vibrant, her usual self, but with an edge I hadn't seen before. The tipping point came on the second evening. We were gathered on the veranda, the sea breeze carrying the scent of salt and jasmine. William had pulled Lucy aside for a private conversation. From where I sat, I couldn't hear their words, but the way they leaned into each other, their heads close, sent a pang of unease through me. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I turned to Lucy. "What's going on with William?" She looked at me, startled. "What do you mean? You seem close." She laughed lightly, brushing it off. "Mark, he's just a client. A very important one. We're building rapport, it's part of the job." Her explanation should have reassured me, but it didn't. There was something in her tone, a defensiveness that didn't sit right. Still, I let it go. Pushing the issue would only create tension, and I didn't want to sour the weekend. The next day, William invited me to his study. The room was opulent, lined with leather-bound books and mahogany furniture. He offered me a drink, his demeanor as polished as ever. But as we spoke, the conversation took an unexpected turn. "Mark," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I have a proposition for you. It's unconventional, but I think it's worth considering." I frowned, unsure of where this was going. "What kind of proposition?" His smile was disarming, but his eyes gleamed with something darker. "I'd like to spend the rest of the weekend with Lucy. Just her. And in exchange, I'll deposit $100,000 into your joint account." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," he said calmly, as if he were discussing a business transaction. "I find Lucy captivating. And I believe this arrangement could be mutually beneficial." My fists clenched at my sides, but I forced myself to stay composed. "You're out of your mind." William shrugged, unbothered by my reaction. "Think it over. There's no rush." I stormed out of the room, my mind racing. When I confronted Lucy, her response shattered me. She didn't deny it. Instead, she hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Mark," she whispered, "I think. I agree." I walked out of the villa into the humid night air, my mind a storm of anger and disbelief. The scene kept replaying in my head, William's smug confidence, Lucy's hesitant agreement, and the gut-wrenching realization that the woman I had loved for so many years could even entertain such a betrayal. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was both a comfort and a mockery. Just yesterday, this place had seemed like paradise. Now, it felt like a gilded cage, trapping me in a nightmare I couldn't escape. I wanted to lash out, to rage, but instead, I found myself walking along the beach, the sand cool beneath my bare feet. How could Lucy agree? Was it greed? Infatuation? Or was there something deeper, something I had missed in the quiet rhythms of our life together? I needed answers. And yet, as much as I wanted to confront her, the thought of hearing more lies or half-truths was unbearable. So I walked, letting the anger churn inside me, shaping it into something colder, sharper. When I returned to the villa, the lights in our room were off. I stepped inside quietly, my movements careful. Lucy was in bed, her back to me, her breathing steady. Was she asleep, or just pretending? I didn't care. I slid into the chair by the window, staring out at the dark horizon. Sleep was a distant concept. The next morning, Lucy acted as if nothing had happened. She smiled at me over breakfast, chatted with the other guests, and even joked with William as if the previous night's conversation had been a figment of my imagination. I played along, maintaining an outward calm, but inside, my thoughts were a whirlwind of plans and possibilities. When William approached me later, I didn't flinch. "Have you thought about my proposal?" he asked, his tone casual, as if we were discussing stocks or football. "I have," I said evenly. "And I've decided I'll leave the decision to Lucy. If she agrees, I won't stop her." His eyebrows lifted in surprise, then a slow smile spread across his face. "Wise choice, Mark. Very wise. But as he walked away, his self-satisfied demeanor only fueled my resolve. If they thought they could make a fool of me, they were in for a rude awakening. By the time dinner rolled around, Lucy seemed more distant than usual. She avoided eye contact, her laughter a little too forced. I stayed silent, observing her, letting the weight of the situation settle. It wasn't until we returned to our room that I spoke. "So, what's your decision?" I asked, my voice calm but laced with steel. Lucy froze, her back to me. She turned slowly, her face a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Mark, it's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I interrupted. "You're considering his offer. You're actually thinking about it." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't waver. "He's offering us security, Mark," she said finally, her voice trembling. "Do you know what that money could do for us? For the kids? It's just one weekend." I laughed bitterly. "One weekend? You think that makes it better? You think that erases the betrayal?" "It's not betrayal if I'm honest about it," she snapped, her voice rising. "I'm not sneaking around, Mark. I'm telling you the truth. Doesn't that count for something?" "No, Lucy," I said coldly. "It doesn't. Because the truth is, you're willing to sell yourself, and our marriage, for a quick payday." She flinched as if I had struck her. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the air between us thick with tension. Finally, she whispered, "I thought you'd understand." "Understand what?" "That you're willing to throw away everything we've built. That you'd even entertain the idea of being with another man for money." Her tears fell freely now, but I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. "I thought this was about us," she said softly. "About building a better life for the kids, for our family." "This isn't about us," I replied. "This is about you. Your choices. Your betrayal." She didn't respond. Instead, she turned away, retreating to the bathroom and closing the door behind her. I stood there for a moment, my chest heaving, then grabbed my laptop from my bag. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not without a fight. By the time Lucy emerged from the bathroom, her eyes red and puffy, I had already begun my work. Years of experience in IT had taught me how to dig into systems, find weaknesses, and exploit them. William Fellows was a man who thrived on power and image. If he thought he was untouchable, it was only because no one had dared to challenge him. Until now. "Mark," Lucy said hesitantly, her voice raw from crying. "I'm sorry. Save it," I said, not looking up from my screen. "You made your choice. Now, I'm making mine." She didn't ask what I meant. Perhaps she didn't want to know. She climbed into bed, and I worked late into the night, my fingers flying over the keyboard, my mind focused on a single goal, taking William down. The next day, William was unusually chipper. He greeted me with a firm handshake, a knowing smile on his lips. Lucy avoided me entirely, sticking close to the other guests as we prepared to leave the island. But I wasn't done. Not yet. As we boarded the plane, I sent the final email. By the time we landed, the wheels of William's downfall would already be in motion. Financial records, shady deals, offshore accounts, it was all there, packaged neatly and sent to the right authorities. The flight was quiet, tension hanging heavy between Lucy and me. She tried to catch my eye a few times, but I refused to acknowledge her. My focus was elsewhere, on the storm I had unleashed and the satisfaction that awaited me. As we touched down, I glanced at my phone. A notification blinked on the screen, message received. Investigation underway. William didn't stand a chance. And neither did the version of Lucy who had betrayed me. Back home, the weight of the weekend hung heavily over the house. The children were blissfully unaware, chatting about their upcoming school projects and soccer practice. But between Lucy and me, the silence was deafening. It wasn't the quiet of peace, it was the void left by shattered trust. I watched her move around the kitchen that evening, preparing dinner with a strained expression. Her attempts at normalcy only deepened my resentment. She hadn't brought up William again since we returned, but the memory of her hesitancy, her agreement to his vile proposal, was branded into my mind. I bided my time. Revenge wasn't just about striking, it was about timing. And in William's case, the timing was impeccable. Monday morning arrived, and I dressed for work with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Lucy lingered in the doorway as I adjusted my tie. "Mark," she began cautiously, "can we talk?" I looked at her, keeping my expression neutral. "About what?" "About us. About what happened. What's there to say?" I asked, my voice calm but devoid of warmth. "You made your decision. I made mine." "It's not that simple," she pleaded. I wasn't thinking clearly. I let the idea get into my head, but I would never. "Don't finish that sentence," I interrupted sharply. "We both know you considered it. That's enough." Her face crumpled, but I didn't offer comfort. I picked up my briefcase and walked past her. "I'll see you tonight." As I drove to work, my phone buzzed with an email notification. I glanced at the screen and felt a grim satisfaction. The investigation into William's finances had already escalated. By the time I reached the office, the buzz was palpable. "Did you hear?" one of my colleagues whispered as I walked by. "William Fellows is under investigation. Fraud, embezzlement, the whole 9 yards." I pretended to be surprised. "Wow," I said, shaking my head. "That's unexpected." But inside, I was anything but surprised. This was the culmination of hours of meticulous effort, and it was only the beginning. Lucy called me during lunch, her voice hesitant. "Mark, something's going on with William. There's talk of legal trouble, serious stuff. Do you know anything about this?" I smiled faintly, glad she couldn't see me. "No idea," I said smoothly. "Maybe it's karma." "Karma?" she repeated, confused. "Yeah," I said. "You play with fire, eventually you get burned." I hung up before she could respond. Her distress didn't move me. If anything, it fueled my resolve. She needed to understand the gravity of her actions, and the consequences. By midweek, William's downfall was all anyone could talk about. His assets were frozen, his name splashed across headlines. The firm scrambled to distance itself from him, with Lucy caught in the crossfire. She spent her days in damage control, fielding calls and issuing statements, her usual poise replaced by visible strain. At home, she tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, but the cracks were obvious. Her smiles were forced, her laughter hollow. And every time she looked at me, I saw the guilt in her eyes. "Mark," she said one evening as we sat in the living room, the kids upstairs, "can we please talk?" I set down the book I was pretending to read and looked at her. "Talk about what?" "About us. About everything that's happened." I gestured for her to continue. She hesitated, then spoke, her voice trembling. "I was wrong. About everything. I let the idea of the money blind me. I let William manipulate me. But Mark, I swear, I never would have gone through with it." "Do you honestly expect me to believe that?" I asked, my tone icy. "You didn't hesitate when he made the offer. You didn't even look at me when you agreed." Tears welled in her eyes. I was scared. Confused. "It wasn't real, Mark. It was just. I don't know what it was." "It was betrayal," I said bluntly. "You put a price on our marriage. You put a price on yourself. And for what? 100 grand? That's all it took for you to throw away everything we built." Her sobs were quiet, almost inaudible. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I love you, Mark. I do. I made a mistake, a terrible, awful mistake. But please, don't let this destroy us. I stared at her, my heart a conflicting mess of anger, pain, and something I couldn't quite name. Love? Pity? Whatever it wasn't enough to wash away the bitterness. I don't know if I can forgive you, Lucy, I said finally. Not now. Maybe not ever. Her sobs grew louder, and I left the room, retreating to the solace of my home office. The next day, I took the final steps in my plan. My actions had already taken William down, but now it was time to secure my own future. I met with a divorce attorney, laying out the details of our situation. Lucy didn't know it yet, but I wasn't planning to stay in a marriage built on fractured trust. When I returned home that evening, Lucy was waiting. Her expression was weary, her eyes red from crying. She reached for my hand as I walked through the door. I love you, Mark, she said quietly. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because in my mind, there was no making it right. There was only moving forward, and leaving the past behind. The next few weeks unfolded like a slow-motion train wreck. At work, the fallout from William's collapse continued to ripple through the firm. Lucy was no longer the golden girl, whispers followed her wherever she went. Her career, once so carefully built, now hung by a thread. At home, things were no better. The space between us grew wider each day, an unspoken agreement to avoid the inevitable confrontation. But while Lucy spiraled, I thrived. The satisfaction of seeing William's empire crumble was a balm to my wounded pride. Still, it wasn't enough. I wanted something more, not just revenge, but a clean slate. And that required decisive action. One evening, I found Lucy sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her phone. The lines on her face seemed deeper, her once vivid energy dimmed. Mark, she said quietly, not looking up, are you going to leave me? The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. I hesitated, then pulled out a chair and sat across from her. What do you think, Lucy? Her voice wavered. I think I deserve it. But I'm begging you, Mark. Don't do this. Don't give up on us. For a moment, I almost softened. Almost. But then I remembered the look in her eyes when she agreed to William's offer, and the resolve returned. I haven't decided yet, I said evenly. But I need time. Space. She nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Whatever you need. Just, don't make it final yet. I left her there and retreated to my office. The divorce papers sat in my desk drawer, unsigned but ready. I stared at them for a long time before closing the drawer. Not yet. Not tonight. The next morning, Lucy's voice woke me from a restless sleep. Mark, there's someone at the door. Groggy, I pulled on a robe and made my way downstairs. A man in a suit stood on the porch, holding a briefcase. He introduced himself as an investigator with a firm I'd never heard of. Mr. Johnson, he said, his tone professional but firm, I'd like to ask you a few questions about your connection to William Fellows. My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my face neutral. Connection? I worked for the same company he did, but that's about it. The investigator raised an eyebrow. We have reason to believe otherwise. Financial records show a transfer from one of William's accounts to an offshore account linked to an email address registered in your name. Shock rippled through me, quickly replaced by anger. That's ridiculous. I've never. He interrupted, pulling out a folder from his briefcase. Inside were documents, detailed records of transactions I had never seen before. But as I scanned the pages, my stomach dropped. The account numbers matched. The email address matched. And yet, I had no memory of any of this. What are you saying? I asked, my voice tight. That I was involved in his schemes. The investigator didn't answer directly. It would be in your best interest to come clean about any dealings you may have had with Mr. Fellows. Lucy appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Mark? What's going on? I turned to her, but before I could speak, the investigator continued. Mrs. Johnson, we've also uncovered some unusual activity in your accounts. Her eyes widened. What? No, that's impossible. Is it? He asked, his gaze sharp. Because the timing of these transactions coincides perfectly with the collapse of Mr. Fellow's company. Panic set in. I knew I hadn't orchestrated this, but someone had. Someone with access to my life, my accounts, my passwords. And the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Lucy. I turned to her, searching her face for any hint of guilt. But all I saw was confusion, or was it an act? Lucy, I said slowly, do you know anything about this? Me, she gasped. Mark, how could you even ask that? But her denial rang hollow. The timing, the sudden shift in her behavior, the ease with which she had entertained William's offer, it all pointed to something far more sinister than a simple lapse in judgment. The investigator handed me a card. We'll be in touch. I suggest you both get your affairs in order. He left, leaving us standing in stunned silence. I stared at Lucy, my mind racing. What did you do? Nothing, she cried, tears streaming down her face. I swear, Mark, I didn't do anything. But I didn't believe her. Not anymore. And as I watched her crumble before me, a new kind of rage bubbled to the surface. She hadn't just betrayed me, she had framed me. In the days that followed, I began my own investigation. Late at night, after Lucy had gone to bed, I combed through our accounts, emails, and phone records. The pieces slowly began to fit together. Lucy hadn't just betrayed me for William's offer, she had been working with him all along. The offshore account was hers, set up months before our trip to the island. The transfers matched with her travel dates, the ones she had claimed were work-related. And the final, damning piece of evidence? An email she had sent from my laptop, forging my signature on a financial agreement with William. When I confronted her, she broke down completely. I didn't know it would go this far, she sobbed. It was supposed to be harmless. Just a few transfers to help him out. He promised no one would find out. You destroyed everything, I said coldly. Our marriage, our family, my reputation, everything. I thought I could fix it, she pleaded. I thought I could make it right. But there was no fixing this. The investigation would unravel her lies soon enough, and I would make sure the authorities knew the truth. As she begged for forgiveness, I realized the irony. I had spent weeks plotting revenge against William and Lucy, only to discover they had been 2 steps ahead all along. But now, the tables had turned. And this time, I would be the one walking away, leaving the wreckage behind. Lucy might have thought she had won, but she underestimated one thing, my ability to rise from the ashes, stronger and untouchable. This wasn't just the end of our marriage, it was the beginning of her reckoning.